The cameras were rolling. The audience was respectfully quiet. Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams sat in the guest chair with the kind of perfect military posture that never really leaves a soldier, even years after they've left the service. But in the next 15 minutes, everything would change. David Letterman would ask one innocent question about an old injury, and the answer would reveal a betrayal so profound, so systematically cruel, that it would silence a studio full of people and remind a nation that some wounds never heal, especially when the very system that created them refuses to treat them. It was Thursday night, November 7th, 2019. Inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, 300 people had gathered for what was supposed to be a straightforward interview about veteran services and community support. Marcus Williams looked exactly like what Americans picture when they think decorated veteran. Square jaw, close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, eyes that had seen things but still held dignity and strength. His dress uniform jacket hung perfectly on his frame, ribbons and medals arranged with the precision that only comes from years of military discipline. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Infantry Badge, each piece of metal telling a story of service, sacrifice, and honor earned in the mountains and deserts of Afghanistan. He was there to talk about Warriors Forward, a support group he'd started for veterans struggling with PTSD in the transition to civilian life. It was exactly the kind of segment David loved, a chance to highlight someone doing good work, to shine a light on issues that mattered, to give a platform to people who deserved recognition. The booking had come through the show's community outreach coordinator, who'd been impressed by Marcus's articulate passion and the measurable impact his program was having on veteran suicide rates in the tri-state area. "So tell us about Warriors Forward," David said, settling into the familiar rhythm of an interview he knew would be both meaningful and manageable. "How did you get started helping other veterans?" Marcus's voice carried the measured cadence of someone accustomed to briefing superior officers, clear and authoritative, but without arrogance. "Well, David, when I came back from my second deployment in Afghanistan in late 2019, I realized that a lot of us were struggling with the same things. The transition back to civilian life, dealing with what we'd seen and done over there, trying to figure out how to function in a world that felt completely foreign after years of combat operations." David nodded appreciatively. This was territory he was comfortable with, honoring service, discussing the challenges veterans faced, celebrating someone who was making a difference in their community. "And you decided to do something about it?" "I figured if we could face down Taliban fighters and survive IED attacks, we could face down our own demons," Marcus said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But it helps to have people who understand what you're going through, people who've been in the same firefights, who know what it's like to lose brothers in arms, who understand why you wake up in a cold sweat when a car backfires." The interview was going exactly as scripted. Marcus was articulate, passionate, and inspiring. The audience was engaged, nodding along with his points about brotherhood and mutual support. David found himself genuinely moved by the work this man was doing, turning his own struggles into a lifeline for others who were drowning in the invisible wounds of war. "We meet twice a week in a church basement in Queens," Marcus continued. "Nothing fancy, just folding chairs and coffee, but for a lot of these guys, it's the first place they've been able to talk about what really happened over there without being judged." But then David noticed something that made his host instincts kick in. When Marcus shifted in his chair, reaching for his water glass, he winced slightly. It was subtle, the kind of small movement that someone tries to hide, but David had interviewed enough people over the years to recognize pain when he saw it. There was something in the way Marcus moved his left shoulder, a careful guardedness that suggested ongoing physical discomfort. "You okay there?" David asked, his tone light but concerned. "Old war injury?" The question was innocent enough, the kind of casual inquiry that usually elicited brief stories about training accidents or minor combat wounds that had healed long ago with nothing more dramatic than some occasional stiffness in cold weather. But Marcus's face changed instantly. The confident veteran's expression flickered. replaced for just a moment by something that looked like anger mixed with exhaustion and a deep, bone-weary frustration. "Something like that," Marcus said, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested there was much more to the story than he was willing to share in casual conversation. David's eyebrows went up slightly. In 15 years of hosting late-night television, he'd learned to read the spaces between words, to recognize when someone was holding back something significant. The way Marcus had answered wasn't evasive exactly, but it carried weight that suggested complexity and pain beyond what most people would expect from a routine question about old injuries. "Sounds like there's more to it than that," David said gently, his voice taking on the softer tone he used when he sensed that someone needed permission to share something difficult. Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring down at his hands, which David now noticed were trembling slightly. When he looked back up at David, his eyes held a different kind of pain than what David usually saw from veteran guests. This wasn't the distant ache of old memories that had been processed and integrated over time. This was fresh, ongoing, immediate suffering that was clearly affecting his daily life. "David," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying a weight that immediately changed the entire energy of the studio, "can I tell you what it's really like to come home from war?" The studio fell quiet in a way that felt different from the usual respectful attention audiences gave to veteran stories. Something in Marcus's tone had shifted the atmosphere from celebration to something much more serious, much more raw. This wasn't going to be about support groups and healing anymore. This was going to be something much more immediate, much more devastating. "Of course, David said, leaning forward slightly and setting aside his note cards. "Tell me." Marcus took a deep breath, as if he were preparing to cross into enemy territory, steeling himself for a mission he knew would be dangerous but necessary. "July 15th, 2019, I was leading a patrol outside Kandahar when an IED went off under our Humvee. Improvised explosive device. Roadside bomb packed with military-grade explosives and shrapnel. The blast threw me about 20 feet through the air and knocked me unconscious for 3 minutes." David felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't going to be a story about old injuries healing with time and physical therapy. This was going to be about wounds that were still bleeding, still affecting every aspect of this man's life. "When I woke up," Marcus continued, his voice growing steadier as he found his rhythm, "I couldn't remember where I was or what day it was, couldn't remember my unit's call sign, couldn't remember my own middle name. Hell, I couldn't remember my wife's name for about 10 minutes. The medics said I had a severe traumatic brain injury and probable internal bleeding. They medevaced me to Germany first, then to Walter Reed Medical Center." The audience was completely silent now. David could feel the weight of what was coming, could see in Marcus's eyes that this story wasn't going to have the kind of ending that made people feel good about supporting their troops with yellow ribbon magnets and "thank you for your service" handshakes. "The doctors at Walter Reed were incredible," Marcus said. "They saved my life, no question. But the TBI, traumatic brain injury, it's not like a broken bone that heals. It's ongoing. I have memory problems, chronic headaches, balance issues. Some days I can't remember my daughter's name. Some days I can't drive because the world spins too much." David's heart was starting to race. "But the VA is taking care of you, right? That's what they're there for." Marcus's laugh was bitter, completely devoid of humor. The sound of someone who had learned the difference between what America promises its veterans and what it actually delivers. "That's what I thought too." He shifted in his chair again, and this time he didn't try to hide the wince. "The VA covers basic care. They'll give me ibuprofen for the headaches. They'll give me a referral to see a neurologist 6 months from now. They'll provide counseling for PTSD, which is helpful, but it doesn't fix the brain damage." David felt like he was watching a car accident in slow motion, seeing the inevitable collision between expectation and reality. "What do you mean it doesn't fix the brain damage?" "The specialists I need, the neurologists who specialize in blast injuries, the cognitive rehabilitation experts who can help retrain my brain, they're not in the VA system. Or if they are, the wait list is 2 years long. Marcus's voice was growing stronger as he continued. So I started seeing doctors outside the VA, specialists here in New York who actually understand what happens when an IED scrambles your brain. And you know what I found out, David? David shook his head, dreading the answer, but knowing he needed to hear it. Those doctors can help me. The treatments exist. I can get better. Not all the way better, but functional. I can be a father who remembers his kid's birthday. I can be a husband who doesn't forget anniversaries. I can be a man who doesn't have to write down everything before he says it. That's wonderful, David said, but he could hear in his own voice that he was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the catch that would explain why Marcus still seemed to be in pain. It costs $47,000, Marcus said simply, the number hanging in the air like a physical presence. The figure hit the studio like a shock wave. David felt the blood drain from his face. $47,000 for treatment that could restore a veteran's cognitive function after he'd literally taken a bomb for his country. The mathematical cruelty of it was staggering. The VA won't cover it because the doctors aren't in their network, Marcus continued. My insurance won't cover it because they classify it as experimental. So I have a choice. Live with brain damage for the rest of my life or find $47,000. David was struggling to process what he was hearing. Marcus, that's insane. You served your country for 12 years. You were injured in combat defending America. How is this your problem to solve? That's exactly what I thought, Marcus said. I went to my congressman, my senator, the VA ombudsman. You know what they told me? Thank you for your service. Have you tried calling the VA? Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is the estimate from the Neurological Rehabilitation Center in Manhattan. $47,000 for a 6-month treatment program that could give me my life back. He unfolded the paper with trembling hands. I've spent my GI Bill money. I've spent my wife's inheritance. We lost our house 6 months ago and moved in with my mother-in-law. I'm working 3 part-time jobs because I can't hold down full-time employment with the memory problems. David felt physically sick. Marcus, this is completely unacceptable. My wife Sarah wants me to start a GoFundMe, Marcus said, and there was shame in his voice. A GoFundMe for a Purple Heart recipient who needs medical care for injuries sustained defending his country. Do you understand how humiliating that is? David couldn't speak. He was trying to reconcile the image of America he'd grown up believing in, the country that took care of its heroes, that honored its promises to those who served, with the reality of what Marcus was describing. I served my country for 12 years, Marcus continued, his voice beginning to crack. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. I slept in foxholes and ate MREs and got shot at by people who wanted to kill me because I was American. I took a bomb that was meant to kill American soldiers, and now America is telling me that fixing what that bomb broke is my responsibility. The studio was so quiet David could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. 300 people were holding their breath, witnessing something that felt too personal for television but too important to look away from. Marcus, David said, his voice rougher than usual, what do you need? What would actually help? It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything, not just what Marcus needed medically, but what he needed as a human being who had given everything to his country and been abandoned when he needed help most. I need America to keep the promises it made when I enlisted, Marcus said. I need the VA to cover the care that will fix what war broke. I need my congressman to understand that thank you for your service isn't enough when I can't remember my daughter's face some mornings. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. I need Americans to understand that when they send young men and women to war, the cost doesn't end when the shooting stops. The bill keeps coming for decades, and right now we're making the wounded veterans pay it themselves. Behind the scenes, David made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He stood up from his desk and walked over to Marcus's chair. Without hesitation, he extended his hand. Stand up, David said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. Marcus looked confused, but he stood. David looked out at the audience, then back at Marcus, then directly into the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "this man took a bomb for America. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, led soldiers in combat, put his body between danger and the rest of us. He has a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, and right now he's working 3 part-time jobs to try to afford the medical care he needs for injuries he sustained defending our freedom." The audience began to stir, some people standing, others sitting in stunned silence as the full weight of what they were witnessing settled over them. "This isn't about politics, David continued, his voice growing stronger. "This isn't about taking sides or making statements. This is about keeping our promises to the people who kept their promises to us. Marcus Williams didn't come home from war broken because he was weak or because he couldn't handle combat. He came home broken because he was strong enough to put his body between danger and the rest of us, and he paid the price for that courage." David turned to Marcus, whose eyes were filling with tears. "I don't know how to fix the VA. I don't know how to fix the system that's failing you and thousands of other veterans, but I know how to help one person right now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal checkbook, the movement causing a ripple of surprise and anticipation through the studio audience. "What's the name of that treatment center again?" David asked. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. "David, you don't have to—" "The name," David said firmly, his pen already poised over the checkbook. "Manhattan Neurological Rehabilitation Center," Marcus whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. David began writing a check. $47,000, he said. "That's what it cost to fix what war broke in this man's brain." He tore the check out and handed it to Marcus, whose hands were shaking as he took it. "This isn't charity," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "This is an American taking care of another American who took care of all of us. This is what we should be doing for every veteran who needs it." Marcus was crying now. Not quiet tears, but deep sobs of someone who had been carrying an impossible burden and suddenly found it lifted. "David," he managed between sobs, "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," David replied, placing his hand on Marcus's shoulder. 12 years of service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, taking a bomb meant for other American soldiers. That's thanks enough for 10 lifetimes. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite appreciation of a television audience. It was the sound of people who had just witnessed something that restored their faith in human decency, something that reminded them what America could be at its best. David looked directly into the camera, his voice carrying across the studio. "Marcus Williams is one of thousands of veterans who are fighting 2 wars, the one they fought overseas and the one they're fighting here at home against a system that has forgotten them." He paused, looking back at Marcus, who was still staring at the check like he couldn't quite believe it was real. "If you're watching this at home and you want to help other veterans like Marcus, don't just thank them for their service. Demand that your representatives provide the care they were promised, because freedom isn't free. And the bill doesn't stop when the shooting stops. We owe these men and women everything, and paying that debt isn't optional. It's the price of being American." As the show ended and the credits rolled, Marcus sat in the guest chair, still holding David's check. The piece of paper represented more than money. It represented the recognition that his service mattered, that his sacrifice had value, that someone in America still remembered what it meant to take care of the people who had taken care of everyone else. The war in Afghanistan was over. But for thousands of veterans like Marcus Williams, the real battle was just beginning. And on that night in that studio, one man's willingness to act had reminded everyone watching that sometimes keeping America's promises requires more than words. It requires action, compassion, and the understanding that some debts can never be fully repaid, but they must never be forgotten.